Welcome to 2D animation documentary YouTube channel The Classified America. It's 3:20 in the morning on February 28th, 2026. Tehran is asleep. Then, without warning, the sky above Iran's capital fills with fire. Israeli F-35 fighter jets, invisible to radar in stealth mode, unleash precision-guided munitions on targets across the city. The target, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. The operation is called Epic Fury. By sunrise, Khamenei is dead. He'd ruled Iran for 37 years. Within days, Iran will close one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Within weeks, oil prices will spiral past $100 a barrel. And within a month, almost a quarter of the world's oil supply will be cut off from the global economy. But here's the question nobody's asking. Was this really about stopping Iran? Or was this about controlling the choke point that controls the world? To understand how we got here, we need to rewind 9 months. It's June 2025. Israel launches Operation Rising Lion, a full-scale attack on Iran's nuclear program. In the early hours of June 13th, over 200 Israeli aircraft, many equipped with advanced F-35 stealth fighters, strike more than 100 targets across Iran. The Natanz nuclear enrichment facility is hit. The Fordow facility is hit. Isfahan's military complex is hit. Nuclear scientists are killed. Iran's ballistic missile capabilities are degraded in days. The operation is devastating. In just 12 days, Israel and the United States demonstrate that they can cripple Iran's military infrastructure with near-total air superiority. Iran retaliates with over 500 ballistic missiles. A ceasefire holds, but it's fragile. The diplomatic collapse happened months before. In early 2025, nuclear talks between Iran and world powers fail completely. Iran refuses to limit uranium enrichment. By June, the International Atomic Energy Agency reports Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than ever before. The IAEA censures Iran. Iran announces new hardened enrichment facilities. The window for negotiation closes. The window for negotiation closes. That's when Israel acts. By the winter of 2025, tensions remain dangerous but frozen. Then, in late February 2026, President Trump makes a decision. He orders new strikes on Iran. This time, the objective is different. This time, it's personal. This isn't just about nuclear facilities. On February 28, 2026, US and Israeli forces launch Operation Epic Fury. Khamenei dies in the opening hours. Over 40 senior Iranian military and government officials die with him. This was not an accident. The timing was not a coincidence. Within hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard begins transmitting a message via radio to every ship in a narrow waterway south of Tehran. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a waterway roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It sits between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. Every tanker carrying oil from the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world must pass through it. There is no alternative. Not really. Here are the numbers that matter. 20 million barrels of oil pass through the strait every single day. That's 20% of all oil consumed on the entire planet. 27% of the world's maritime trade in crude oil and petroleum products transits this waterway. For liquefied natural gas, the figure is 20%. Qatar and the UAE export LNG through the strait. If the strait closes, that gas is stranded. There's no way around it. Saudi Arabia, which produces 5.3 million barrels daily, depends entirely on this passage. So does Iraq. So does Kuwait. So does Iran itself. The International Energy Agency estimates that only 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day can be diverted through alternative pipelines, Saudi Arabia's Red Sea route and the UAE's pipeline to Fujairah. That leaves a gap of 14 to 16 million barrels per day. When Iran closes the strait, there is simply no way to move that oil. It piles up in storage tanks across the Gulf. Storage tanks that are rapidly filling. On March 4th, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially declares the strait closed to all foreign shipping. The IRGC takes direct control. Iran's military is now running a blockade. Ships attempting to cross receive threats via radio. The British Royal Navy issues advisories. The closure is not legally binding, but safety cannot be guaranteed. Shipping companies don't take that chance. Insurance companies withdraw coverage. War risk surcharges for tankers spike from thousands of dollars to tens of thousands. The economics become impossible. Ships start turning back. By early March, traffic through the strait has collapsed to near zero. The effect is instantaneous. Oil prices have been holding around $72 per barrel in late February. By March 5th, just 1 week into the closure, Brent crude hits $84. By mid-March, it approaches $98. This was not gradual. This was shock. This was the visible hand of Iran squeezing 20% of the world's oil supply. This is economic warfare by geography. The United States does not accept the closure. On March 19, 2026, the U.S. launches an aerial campaign. The objective: reopen the strait. U.S. Air Force and Navy aircraft strike Iranian naval vessels and drone positions around the strait. The campaign is supported by Israeli aircraft. But Iran doesn't back down. Instead, Iran escalates. The Revolutionary Guard responds by laying mines in the strait. The number is reported as fewer than 10 mines, but even this is enough to paralyze shipping further. President Trump posts on social media that if these mines are not removed, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before. The threat doesn't work. The mines stay. By mid-March, global oil markets are in turmoil. The Dallas Federal Reserve publishes analysis modeling a complete strait closure. If this continues through the second quarter of 2026, West Texas Intermediate crude will reach $98 per barrel. Global real GDP growth will fall by 2.9 percentage points. That's a recession. That's stagflation. The International Energy Agency announces a coordinated emergency release of oil reserves, the largest in its history. 400 million barrels are released to try to stabilize markets. It's barely enough to slow the bleeding. China responds on March 11th by imposing export restrictions on refined petroleum products. China is the world's largest crude oil importer. Most of its imports come from the Persian Gulf. When the Gulf closes, China's energy security becomes critical. The government acts to protect domestic supplies first. India, Japan, South Korea, all major oil importers dependent on the strait, face the same crisis. The domino effect spreads. By March, the world economy is running on fumes. Storage tanks across the Gulf region are filling. Oil producers in Iraq, Kuwait, and other Gulf nations have no choice but to curtail production. You cannot produce oil you cannot store or export. Production cuts begin immediately. Refineries around the world reduce operations. Petrochemical plants shut down. The ripple effect reaches every industry dependent on petroleum or petrochemicals. That's almost everything. Then, in mid-April, there's a moment of hope. A ceasefire is negotiated. A 10-day truce. The strait reopens. 12 oil tankers cross in the first hours. The world takes a breath. Oil prices dip slightly. But less than 24 hours later, on April 18, 2026, Iran's military announces the strait is closing again. The reason? The United States has imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports. Iranian gunboats fire on merchant vessels attempting to transit. The IRGC issues a statement. Until the U.S. restores full freedom of navigation for vessels traveling from Iran to their destinations and back, the status of the Strait of Hormuz will remain tightly controlled. The closure is not temporary. It's a tool, and Iran is using it as leverage. Here's what gets buried beneath the headlines. This is not actually about energy security or nuclear weapons or even Khamenei's government. This is about power over the global economy, and it reveals something uncomfortable about how the world really works. Layer 1 is visible. Iran closes the strait as a desperate act of self-defense against military strikes. The IRGC controls the waterway militarily because Iran has nowhere else to go. Cornered, invaded, losing its leader, Iran weaponizes the only leverage it has: geography. But Layer 2 is the systemic reality. Oil flows through the strait because it has to. There is no alternative infrastructure. For decades, the United States has maintained naval dominance of this waterway to ensure free passage and stable energy markets. But what happens when one nation, Iran, sitting directly above the strait, decides that assumption is wrong? What happens when geography trumps naval power? Layer 3 is the hidden beneficiary, who wins when oil prices spike from $72 to $98. Not consumers, not most economies. The winners are oil producers who can still export: Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States own shale producers. The winners are oil companies with massive profit margins when prices soar. What does a $98 barrel of oil do? It makes every alternative, renewable energy, electric vehicles, efficiency, suddenly economically viable. It makes petrostates obsolete faster. It accelerates the energy transition away from petroleum. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say. Closing the Strait of Hormuz does more damage to the global economy than it does to the United States. America is a net energy exporter now. Shale has made that possible. China, Japan, South Korea, Europe, they need that oil far more than America does. The Strait's closure demonstrates that American military power cannot guarantee something the world thought was guaranteed. The CIA and Mossad calculated that killing Khamenei would decapitate Iran's government and force submission. They miscalculated. Instead, they triggered the opposite. A new supreme leader, Khamenei's son Mojtaba, takes power. The IRGC, which has grown stronger throughout the conflict, consolidates control. The government becomes more militant, not less. And Iran discovers that closing the strait is the most powerful weapon it possesses. It costs Iran nothing to keep the valve closed. Ships are insured. Tankers wait in anchorages. But every day the strait is closed, the cost to the global economy multiplies. This is asymmetric warfare. This is how a medium-sized power with no navy and limited air force defeats a superpower with the world's largest military budget. Geography is destiny, and Iran controls the geography. What are the possible outcomes? There are 3 paths forward, and history tells us something about each one. Path 1. Prolonged closure. If the strait remains closed for weeks or months, the economic damage becomes irreversible. The Federal Reserve model shows that even a single quarter of closure reduces global growth by nearly 3 percentage points. Extended closure could trigger a global recession. Oil rationing would begin. Strategic petroleum reserves would deplete. The geopolitical realignment would be permanent. Countries that depend on Gulf oil would be forced to negotiate with Iran directly. The American-led global order, which depends on dollar dominance and energy security guarantees, would fracture. Path 2. Military escalation to reopen the strait. The United States has the capability to minesweep the strait and establish safe passage by force. It has done this before. But doing so means sustained military operations in the Persian Gulf against an opponent that controls the terrain. It means accepting casualties. The political cost in Washington is enormous. Congress would demand debate. The American public would question why troops are dying for oil when the U.S. doesn't need imported oil anymore. Path 3. Negotiation. The United States lifts the naval blockade on Iranian ports. Iran opens the strait. But this requires the new Iranian leadership, the IRGC, under Mojtaba Khamenei's authority, to accept a deal. These are hardliners. History shows us the danger. In 1987 and 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, Iran repeatedly threatened to close the strait. The U.S. Navy conducted Operation Earnest Will, escorting Kuwaiti tankers through the waterway under heavy military presence. That operation took months. It cost money. It cost credibility. It ultimately didn't resolve the underlying conflict. We also know from history that when a choke point closes, the global economy doesn't just pause. It adapts in ways that are permanent. During the 1973 oil embargo, OPEC cut production by 5%. Oil prices quadrupled. So what is this story really about? On the surface, it's about a conflict between Iran and the West. But at a deeper level, this is a story about the end of an era. The era when American military power could solve every geopolitical problem by controlling key terrain. Iran is the visible actor. The IRGC is the military force executing the closure. Mojtaba Khamenei is the new leader. But the systemic force underneath is the decline of American hegemony in energy markets. For 50 years, the American Navy guaranteed free passage through global choke points. That guarantee is no longer absolute. The biggest winner, ultimately, is the nation that can offer a new arrangement: China. China is buying oil directly from Iran. China is negotiating independent energy deals. The real losers are ordinary people in energy-poor countries: Japan, South Korea, the EU. These are wealthy, stable, allied nations facing energy insecurity for the first time since the 1970s. And for America, the verdict is mixed. The US is less vulnerable to closure than it used to be. Shale oil has made America a net energy exporter. But the dollar's dominance, the US military's credibility, and American geopolitical influence all depend on being the guarantor of a stable, open global economy. One waterway, 20% of the world's oil, the leverage to reshape global politics. This was not an accident. The timing was not a coincidence. So here's the binary question for you. Do you think the United States was right to strike Iran's leadership, knowing the risk this creates to global energy security? Or do you think the calculus was wrong, and that finding a diplomatic off-ramp was always going to be cheaper than military escalation? Let us know in the comments what you think. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.